stories. This is a true story about an ex-friend of mine I tried to help through his terrifying obsession with a girl to no avail. I've always been the type to observe everything from a safe distance. Seldom I am ever brought into drama, but people come to me for advice a lot. I've given people sound counseling, but this particular guy I knew was beyond any form of help. This guy, we'll call him Andy. I'll change all the names, made no point to cover up his psycho. From mumbling aloud to himself in public to being physically harmful, Andy was quite the basket case. I started out knowing very little about him because I kept to myself, and come gym class when we'd walk the track, I'd have my headphones in most of the time. When a girl began walking around the track with him and conversing with him, I instantly noticed, as I would overhear them talking about some metal bands I coincidentally enjoyed. I'm not really sure how I wound up in this group, but maybe one of them made a move to hang out with me, possibly my hilarious gay friend Mac. This group consisted of Andy the Psycho, Krista, Mac, and two other girls, apart from myself. We had our subgroups. Christina and the other two girls were heavily into anime, whilst Mac and I would get into deep conversations about the mysteries of life. Andy, on the other hand, mostly sat and listened to Christina. He had an obvious fixation on her, and by the middle of the school year, everyone, including Krista, knew how desperate he was for her. Krista stated that she did not date as her father was very protective, and to be honest, she kinda gave off a lesbian vibe anyway. Despite her efforts to pull away from him, Andy was practically on top of her, forcing hugs she awkwardly yanked away from, and making it known he wanted her. On one occasion, she'd blocked his number after realizing it was a mistake to give it to him. He managed to steal her phone number and unblock his number, and upon confrontation, he had admitted to blocking his twin brother's number on her phone. Andy absolutely hated his twin and never wanted to be compared to him, which would be expected as his brother was the charismatic one with lots of friends. Yet Andy said on multiple occasions he'd wished his brother was dead and joked about the joyful thought of killing him. I did not judge harshly at first, but my friend Mac did. He would let Andy know what a creep he was. One time, Krista and Andy were talking as he had taken his seat right before her. He was telling her not to talk to his brother, and somewhere in the conversation, right in the school library, he slapped her for not listening. I'll never forget the fear and anger on her face, and from then on, even after his awkward apology, Krista let him know he should stay away. Unfortunately, he had taken to talking to me all along, as I have always been a soundboard whether I cared to be or not. Every day on the bus, it was Krista, Krista, Krista. Some days he'd just chant her name and get lost in his own thoughts of her. I would try to drop subtle hints that she's not interested, or at the very least to treat her normal and give her space. Apart from his desire for Krista, he was the most desperate guy I'd ever met. He would ask out every girl he met and spoke to for about a day. He would message me on Facebook about how he needed a girlfriend, and luckily, I'd been in a relationship for 4 years by then, and he knew he could not have me. That still did not stop him from hitting on me in such menial ways. I didn't realize at first, including a near proposal. He'd once just typed my name, and when I asked him what was up, he simply said, "You are beautiful, but you look exactly like someone from my past, and it makes me sad remembering her every time I look at you. I miss her." He definitely had a knack for making people uncomfortable, and some days I couldn't help but ignore him. Krista evaded him till high school graduation, but Andy's obsession only seemed to intensify. I genuinely thought he could be helped and I could get through to him whilst keeping my own distance. But he set off too many alarms. Firstly, he was training for some entry into the military boot camp of sorts and was discharged for reasons in relation to his mental state, though he wouldn't get too far into it. Secondly, every day he would write me at weird times early in the morning to tell me, "Help, I can't stop thinking of her. I'm in love with her." This was clearly not true, as he had made moves on me and other girls in the time he had known her. He made many implications that he would self-harm to get her off of his mind, but nothing worked. Well, just because he's talking to other girls doesn't mean that he's not in love with the other one. He can't sit around and wait for one. Decide that she wants to fucking be with him. He'd also somehow convinced himself that she wanted him, and would frequent the grocery store she went to and said hi, though she just kept her head down and ignored him. One morning, as I was browsing social media, he messaged me the usual, "I need her, I love her, help, I'm going crazy." I tried to help him analyze his feelings and come to his senses that he was fine and to let her be. I thought, if he's hitting on other girls but claiming to love her, let's see what he's saying to this. I typed out, "Tell me, what do you really love about her?" I cannot believe what he sent me next. It was the most ridiculous and degrading message I had ever read about somebody. "She has such small breasts. I love that about her. I dream of taking her virginity, and I don't think she'd mind how small I am, if you know what I mean." I felt like there is no way that that's true. No guy's going to admit that his dick is that small. I felt like I'd read some psycho's personal diary. Truthfully, this girl was tiny, 18 years old, not even 100 pounds, which made me fear that he'd prey on her. He was very short, but she appeared vulnerable and smaller than him. I was on the last straw playing therapist for this guy who clearly had no goddamn idea he was scaring this girl. Up to the last time we spoke, the worst thing he had requested of me was to get a hold of Krista's new number somehow for him and attempt to lure her into seeing him again. He grew frustrated with my decline and pleaded with me to help him obtain her address. Needless to say, the last night we spoke, I wished him well, told him I would not assist him in terrorizing Krista. Then I blocked him, and it's been about a year since then. I just hope he got the help he needed, and I hope for her sake he hasn't found her or where she lives by now. The first time he asked me out, I said no. We had known each other in art school, and he always struck me as a little off. Not that he wasn't brilliant, not that he didn't have a body that sparked million fantasies and eyes so icy blue they could freeze sunlight, but he was so obviously damaged, so obviously unstable. I wanted to be smarter than my hormones, so I said, "I'm sorry, I can't." He picked me up and lifted me into his arms and walked me across the flooded street. He said he'd ask me again the next day. It was a bold move, and I noticed. It made me nervous. Over the next few weeks he called every day. He emailed twice as often. Love poems laced with sexual words and filled with the specifics of our conversations. He seemed genuinely enamored by me, and finally I relented. I told him I'd go out with him. He'd earned a date. Over coffee he told me about his abusive father and stepfather. He showed me the knife he kept in his pocket of his corny leather jacket. I tried to look unfazed and calm. I didn't ask him back to my place, but I agreed to see him again. I saw him every weekend for almost 2 months before he told me he loved me. After 2 weeks of that, I started saying it back. I must love him, I thought, after countless hours listening to him cry on the phone in the wee hours of the morning, telling me he was good enough, that he deserved compassion, that he deserved affection. I thought that meant I must have loved him. I was obligated to love him. Winter came, and he fought with his mother. She kicked him out of the house, and she told me, as a blizzard rolled in, that he was sleeping in his car, that he didn't care if he froze to death. For the first time, I invited him to my apartment to sleep on the couch. He wasn't my boyfriend. I wasn't sleeping with him. I let him know I wasn't interested in either of those things, but he could sleep on the couch. When he closed my apartment door behind me, he shut out everything about the world that made sense. He yelled at me and sobbed in turn, threatened suicide, and climbed uninvited into my bed. He hurt me, emotionally and physically both. And when I finally lost the ability to continue to stop him, he raped me in the dawn light of my own bed. Then he put on his shoes and left. I didn't answer the phone for days, didn't leave the house. I lost my job, too traumatized to move. My answering machine filled with messages from him, all professing his love for me. As I gathered enough of my courage, I wrote him a letter telling him never to contact me again, but every few hours another call, another email. A well-meaning neighbor let him into my building, and he stood outside my apartment door sobbing until I called the police. When they arrived, I decided to file a report. It had been more than a week since the assault. What did I have to prove my story to them? The calls and messages were relentless. After 2 months and 3 changed phone numbers and email addresses, I couldn't face living alone anymore. I moved in with friends, male friends I thought might deter him. I told all of my mutual acquaintances he had raped me and wouldn't leave me alone. For a few days, the phone calls became more plaintive and desperate, and then they turned ugly. The same talent he had used to woo me with beautiful poetry produced threat after threat, sent from anonymous email addresses but laced with hints. He threatened to kidnap me from the coffee shop I frequented and skin me alive. He told me I looked beautiful when I walked to the grocery store, mentioned the clothes I wore that day and how many bags of groceries I took home. He threatened to cut out my heart with his knife I'd seen on our first date. I stopped leaving the house. I saved every letter, every note, every voicemail. For 2 years, I wondered when enough would be enough, when the dam would break and I would have the evidence I needed to take to the police. But nothing had his name on it. Everything was so careful. No email address used twice, no names, every threat sent in the form of a fiction story starring fictional characters. It was all my word against his. But one day I couldn't handle it anymore. Not knowing where else to go, I went to Planned Parenthood. They listened, they believed me, and did not blame me, but referred me to a psychiatrist to the courthouse to file an order of protection. When I arrived at the courthouse, I had the police report from when I decided to name him. I had told officers my ex wouldn't leave my front door. 2 years earlier, I was told I would have to report the assault to police before I could proceed. Reporting the rape and the stalking to the police was nearly more traumatic than the experience itself. As I read story after story aloud, the officers rolled their eyes and sighed in a bored sort of way. "This sounds like a bad breakup," they said, "not a crime. If you were raped, why wait 2 years to say anything? How do you know that's even about you? Or from him? Aren't you reading an awful lot into this?" At the end of the afternoon, one of the officers shrugged. "I can't file any charges over this. But I can tell him to leave you alone if you want. Scare him for you." I agreed. I don't know what the officer did or said, but it must have worked. In the 8 years since, I have only heard from him once 5 years ago. Maybe an anonymous commenter online said something vague, not exactly threatening, but it sounded like him. I looked for him in every anonymous comment I ever received. I won't step foot in the town where he lived, in the restaurant where he worked, in the coffee shop he threatened to kidnap me from. I still fear him. But I think of him less and less. If I were to see him now, there is nothing I could say to undo the trauma of years of abuse, or of nearly a decade of therapy to overcome what he's done to me. There is nothing I could say to make him feel guilty. I believe his guilt drove me the whole time. Anything I said would only make things worse, and what I want most of all is to believe it's really over. And if I were to say something to him, it wouldn't be over. It would still be happening. I look for him online sometimes. I don't know why. It's compulsive, I guess. I can't stop. I think the biggest misconception about stalking is that it occurs in the real world only, that a stalker shows up on your doorstep, but most stalking is psychological. It's not having a shadow, it's more like having a spy in your life, like having a spy in your head with the access into your life the internet gives nearly everyone. It's easy to learn your habits, to follow you digitally, if not physically, and real terror can occur without any actual contact at all. If you're being stalked, no, you did not ask for this. No, you did not encourage this. Know that as painful as getting help can be, it is worth it. I wish that I hadn't waited so long, because there never was definitive proof. There probably never would have been, no matter how long I waited, and no matter how long anyone being stalked waits. They are abusive, won't fall into some simple track and identify themselves and their intentions. You have to believe that you will be heard, that the truth will be let out despite the obstacles. You have to believe that you can ask for help, and it will arrive, even if it's not the help you expected. There are resources so much better than I knew. If I could go back and tell myself then what I know now, I would tell myself to look for resources specifically for people being stalked, because they exist. There are people who can help so much more than an officer willing to threaten a suspect without accusing him of a crime. There is a better way, and you can find it too. I was 17 when this happened. I'm now 36. This kid I went to school with was charged with murder. I don't remember his name, but I'll call him John. John and I had art class together, and this was the type of high school that had a mounted TV in every classroom. Every day at noon, my art teacher would have the TV on for us to watch the news that came on. John was a normal kid, or so we thought. He was a bit of a bully, but he never bullied me. He did in fact break some kid's arm, from which I heard. He had pushed him down on the floor with such force that John managed to break the other kid's arm. John got suspended for 7 days or so, but he wouldn't be back at school. During his suspension, John killed his mom. I remember my day starting just as a normal day. Every day, humdrum school day. When I got to art class, my art teacher had put on the 12 o'clock news. Right in the middle of the news broadcast, John's face popped up. The guy reporting the story said, "John, had killed his mom. The entire class was dead silent when this was being aired. Apparently, John had killed his mother with a dumbbell bar. He left her body in her room and turned the AC on full blast. One of his friends must have discovered her body because he had some friends over for a party. I really don't know what his prison sentence was, or if his prison sentence was served. I don't know if he's still free or if he is in prison. If you are new, go ahead and hit the like button and subscribe to my channel, as it really helps me out. And if you are already subscribed, welcome back and thank you for subscribing.